So recently I am teaching a watercolor class to adults, and the next class that's coming up is florals and succulents. I really wanted to use this class to teach them how to work with different layering and glazing of watercolor to gradually build up some really beautiful colors and values, as well as some of the loose approaches that they can take to creating florals. So this is me working on my succulent. I've quickly sketched it out in my sketchbook, and I'm trying to slow myself down and really work on building up those subtle values as I layer up to work towards the rich values and colors in my reference image that I found on unsplash.com. The hardest thing I think for me about this approach to watercolor these days is just that I haven't done it in a while. So this has been really good for me to try to be like riding a bike, right? Like to kind of get myself back in the flow and the very slow, patient pace of waiting for those sections to dry, dropping back in color later, knowing when to kind of work wet on wet and when to hold off and let it dry, and really kind of be patient as I figure out what colors to start with as I build up the different sections. And you'll notice I'm not doing any of those things. Well, not really. I'm slowing down and I'm building it up subtly for the most part. And but normally when I would do this approach in the past, I'd paint one section and then I would whatever I painted next would be a section that didn't touch it. And it's really interesting after all these years of doing a lot more loose watercolors and a lot more abstract textured paper watercolor for my mixed media art practice to find that I really have to kind of go even slower and really kind of rein it in because it was really a challenge to get myself to slow down. And in a lot of instances with this particular painting, I didn't slow myself down enough. I didn't wait for those sections to dry, and then I was doing a lot more troubleshooting and problem solving along the way than I might have been able to avoid. I know I could have avoided. So it was kind of funny because I could then go to the class that week and kind of share my challenges as I worked in this approach that used to come quite easily to me when I was teaching watercolor more regularly, when I was teaching in person for my high school classes. And now that I'm only doing like really focused watercolor instruction a couple times a year, and in the in between time, I'm doing so many other art things that I really kind of need to spend some time getting back in the right mindset to approach watercolor in this way. So, this is kind of a new step in me and kind of going back to old practices that I've kind of taken for granted. But in the end, I do really love how the succulent turned out. I learned a ton about myself as an artist and where I'm at. It was a really good reminder of all the things that I know how to do and I know how to instruct students to do. But, like do what I do, not like do what I say, not what I do, has kind of come up a couple times in this class as I kind of have gotten out of the flow of layering up and kind of slow paced, watercolor. So it did involve a lot of kind of pulling the color back and, you know, regaining some of my control over my water and, the wetness of my color. But all of this was great because it allowed me to remember all of the important things that I needed to tell my students so that I could really help them find success on their beginning of their watercolor journey. So it was a really great learning experience and a great reminder, and just kind of proves that even when we have a lot of experience doing something, if we haven't done it in a while, we really need to take the time to kind of get familiar with those things again and also to give ourselves a lot of grace because I have watercolors in my collection, my portfolio that are beautiful, that I'm really proud of, that I know I don't remember struggling with being able to go slow and having that patience and really taking the time to slowly build things up the way you're supposed to. And so I need to work on that. I need to spend some time doing that because painting in this style is something that I really love doing. So it was a really good reminder. But here is the continuation of my layered glazed succulent before we move on to some loose florals. Like I said, I was doing this both as practice for techniques that I was going to teach in an upcoming watercolor class, but I also kind of wanted to show my students some of the different ways you can approach florals. So I have the full succulent that is pretty much done. And then I wanted to kind of go in and show how you could just do a study of a portion of a flower. So I'm just doing a couple succulent petals just to kind of get some more experience, kind of show the different approaches that you can have, and also just to kind of get myself more familiar with this subject matter. I haven't painted realistic watercolor succulents ever. I've done flowers, but I haven't done this specific floral. So I kind of needed to take a little bit of time to kind of really feel out how to build up the colors. Now, should I have done the petal studies prior to the big one? Probably, considering the goal of doing the petals. But lots was learned through the painting of the succulent and its separate petals, so I consider it to be a win. As I said, I also wanted to demonstrate for my students how you can approach loose florals. So the first thing I'm doing is I found another reference of a succulent from a different vantage point, so kind of looking more from the side. And I wanted to show them how you can kind of build up bold brushstrokes and kind of play with manipulating the bristles of the brush and to get different effects and to create different petal shapes, as well as how you can drop in different colors and kind of overlap and build up the essence of a succulent without going in and being so meticulous as far as painting each individual leaf and really, getting really caught up in the kinds of colors there are and the shading and all that kind of thing. And then I decided to branch off from succulents and just kind of show a couple different approaches to loose florals. So the ways that you can create some basic leaf shapes. This one I am using a reference photo. Also, all of my reference images I found on unsplash.com. And just kind of dropping in the color and really focusing on leaf shape, like I said, and how you can give kind of the idea of a flower without stressing too much about all the different ways that a flower looks in real life. And all of these loose florals are what I did talk to them about, going back in with ink and different ways that you can kind of further define things and just different approaches to loose floral. And I show them a ton of different examples that I had created in the past, especially in a class that I took with Onmar Wynn, who does a tremendous job of creating beautiful loose florals, but also teaching that to her students. So this was really fun to kind of take the skills that I learned from Omar and a couple other watercolorists, as well as my own background in watercolor prior to that, and kind of share with my students some ways that you can approach creating florals with watercolor. And then for the third one, I wanted to continue but kind of show a different kind of flower. So this one is completely from my imagination. And I do find that it's easier for florals to work from direct observation, ideally having the flower in front of you on the table or from a reference photo. But this was kind of a really loose interpretation of a flower, more with the focus on kind of, the ways you can manipulate the brush more than anything, and then how you can put in the stem part and the leaves and really kind of play with further brush manipulation to get different shapes, as well as letting the color of the flower and the color of the stem bleed together where the two meet. I hope you enjoyed checking out what I've been up to with watercolor in the studio lately. Don't forget to give the video a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.